We are, Bill, we're going online right now.
All right.
Yeah. Hi, Bob.
Hello, sir.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Very good. Very good.
Welcome.
Thank you. How's everybody doing?
Good to see you.
Okay. Finally getting close to normal. Not very normal so far, but getting close.
We have around 50 participants.
Yeah, right now. People are just coming in. Okay, so I will do a briefly introduction about the rules of the web meeting. So people will raise hands after the presentation to ask direct questions for you guys. And we're gonna open the microphone for direct questions if they want to do. And otherwise the Q&A function will be reserved for questions. So if there's any question that you guys can help answering direct by text messaging after the or prior to the presentations will be very good. And we ask people not to use the chat for questions at all. So I'm gonna do this briefly introduction in Portuguese for everybody, and we're ready to go after that. Okay. Boa noite a todos. Como esse é o 5º módulo do nosso curso de cirurgia da coluna na era 4.0, chegamos hoje em avanços da cirurgia robótica, de técnicas de navegação e técnicas modernas de obtenção de imagem. E como eu tenho feito todas as semanas, eu tenho feito uma pequena introdução relacionado aos temas e também uma introdução com relação à utilização da ferramenta do Zoom para aqueles que estão usando pela primeira vez ou que possam ter qualquer tipo de dúvida. Lembrando que essa é uma campanha, o curso inteiro é uma campanha de fundraising para Fiocruz, de levantar verbas para doação para Fiocruz no combate ao Covid-19. Então, se você não fez a sua doação e tem interesse em doar algum dinheiro em qualquer espécie para essa causa, por favor, escaneie o QR Code que está na porção inferior esquerda das telas, que vai ser direcionado direto para o site de doação. Então, só uma breve introdução com relação às funções do Zoom, para todos aqueles que estiverem participando, microfones fechados, fora o apresentador. E após cada apresentação, existe a possibilidade de fazer perguntas direto para os apresentadores, perguntas vocais, né, verbais diretas. Se você tem interesse em fazer uma pergunta para algum dos temas, por favor, levante a mão, usando a ferramenta levantar a mão. Se você tem alguma dúvida que você quer deixar para a plateia e que seja respondida via texto, utilize a ferramenta Q&A e apenas utilize a ferramenta chat, né, o bate-papo, para quando for conversa aberta, que o objetivo não é ser pergunta direta. Lembrando que os temas dessa noite vão ser os avanços da robótica e navegação, e os apresentadores da noite são esses aqui que vão ser introduzidos pelos moderadores. Então, obrigado mais uma vez pela presença de todos e vamos dar início aí às moderações e às apresentações para nos mantermos no tempo.
Então, eu sou moderador, não é? E eu vou querer apresentar o nosso primeiro panelista, que é o Robert Isaacs, que além de ser meu amigo, é um gênio, tão gênio que agora ele passou a ser um empresário do futuro, da tecnologia de futuro. Bob Isaacs, it's a big honor to have you here with us. I'm just sad that you are my friend more than anything else. So we can wait to hear you, your talk, and then I will introduce the other people.
It's really kind. Thank you so much, Luis. I'm going to share my screen. I was asked to talk a little bit today about robots and how these systems plus the navigation systems that are used are helping to define what we're doing right now. I have a number of conflicts in this space, and here are my disclosures. The interest in robotics has grown tremendously. I think it's obvious to everyone that you look, there's a handful of some early thoughts on the idea, and then the literature, if nothing else, has just grown tremendously. The interest in these devices, just in the literature, or if you walk around the exhibit hall at any meeting, you'll see literally everyone seems to have a robot. If they don't have one, the first 4 on this list have essentially come out, and like the first 3 have a robot actively in the market, and then the remaining 4, at least as it stands today, have all made huge waves towards acquiring these technologies, and people are spending billions of dollars. J&J bought Auris for $3.4 billion. This is something that is coming, if it's not already fully here, it is actively coming more and more, and people are going to continue to be talking about these technologies without question. And you also see a rise in the amount of intraoperative CAT scanning devices like the O-arm and the Aero. These devices, plus obviously getting preoperative scans, become critical to the advent of the acceptance of these technologies. But when you look at new technology, you'll see that the technology adoption curves tend to follow a certain trend. And so Clay Christensen coined the chasm, crossing the chasm, in the book so titled, that you get these people that are super early adopters and innovators who are very interested in the technology and see how they go. You've got to cross the chasm into more mainstay, into the larger group, to get people really accepting these technologies, because at the same time, there's another way of looking at technology, which is the technology hype curve. And you'll see that there's an awful lot of early excitement. There's a peak of inflated expectations, but then you get this big drought, this big realization at the early on that what people thought might be able to do really quickly is not born into reality. Now, ultimately, what you're going to see is that this is going to plateau up and come back up again as more and more people are going to be, expectations will be hopefully met. And I think the long-term hope for these technologies is very exciting. But as it stands today, the FDA in the United States has only approved these devices to work with placing in pedicle screws. So effectively, they become a helping hand. To help you place in a pedicle screw using hopefully a navigation system as a backbone. And literally, they're not actually allowed to do anything else, at least in the United States. And so when you think about what we need, I'm not sure we need someone to hold our hand, but what we need is broad applicability. When you look at what people are using these technologies to do in other fields, they can do a lot. And there are surgeries that are effectively only able to be done, or certainly only be able to be done as well, with the use of robotics. We're not there yet with spine. And so until we have more broad applicability, until these systems allow us to either significantly improve our outcomes or don't make us change our current workflow and add benefit, then I think there's a significant hurdle for their wide-scale adoption. And because they're expensive machines, and they add some real negativity to the OR experience. For example, you can't confirm what you're doing in real time with them, and you can't actually re-register or recalibrate the systems, as is very typically. We change the anatomy, we place in cages and expand the spine, we correct deformities. We're not able to continuously re-register and allow these systems to continue to give us current information, active information. And so a lot of people will tell you, well, I like these systems because they give me increased accuracy. And there's no question that the grade A sprue placements by the robotic group, at least in the meta-analyses, look like they really do improve, give us a superior result. And so people say it's a better product, it gives us a better end result. That's what I want if I have surgery. But if you actually critically look at the data, what you'll see is that the A plus B accuracy, meaning the safe, accurately placed screws, are not different between using a robot and not using a robot. And so really there is an equivalent rate of pedicle screw placement. And honestly, the one thing that is clearly evident is they create longer surgical duration. They make surgery longer. And if you look at our published data, pedicle screws placed freehand without a robot, without a navigation system, CT proven 0.3% malposition, and you look at the robot data of 96.5% or 3.5% malposition, you'd see that in our hands, it would at least be an order of magnitude increase in the rate of malposition implants using these technologies. So it's obvious is that they may not be perfect right now. Nothing is this early in their life cycle, but honestly, there is some good with them as well. I don't mean to be super negative, and we can do some cases to kind of give us a feeling of what we're talking about. Because if you look at a person like this, a person who's not done well, had a fusion at 3-4, nice solid fusion, ultimately ends up getting a spinal cord stimulator. You can see the implant leads here, develops a mobile spondylolisthesis with a calcified synovial cyst and causing severe radicular pain. And you can see it's nice and mobile on flexion extension views. And use the case you would do open. When you look at the CT scan, you'll see the anatomy is completely distorted. It would be very hard to do this case without some kind of assistance, whether that's fluoroscopic or in this case, robotic. And so you can see the planning of the screws and the performance of the operation here. You get views in lots of different dimensions. You get to place in your pedicle screws into the anatomy, and you'll see that initially you take the shots with your fluoroscope in this case, and you merge it the way is typical at our institution. And the way it's actually approved is you take and you get a preoperative scan and you scan the, you get a fluoroscope shot, an x-ray shot, you merge the two, and then ultimately you can get confirmation shots once the screws are in, and you can see these screws are well placed. And here's the final shot after surgery. And in fact, at Duke, Mohammed Abdel-Bar wrote a nice paper about doing an awake, percutaneous, transforaminal interbody fusion using these devices on a person who just simply refused general anesthesia. And actually, honestly, was too critically ill to undergo general anesthesia. And one thing that's super nice when you look at this screw, for example, this S1 screw that was placed, you'll see it's a very large S1 screw. It's really maximizing the trajectory into the bone and all the way towards being a tricortical screw. And that is a really aggressively angled screw, which is nice that you can do that. And that's actually probably more aggressive than most of us are doing if we're doing it fluoroscopically, because we do have the comfort of a CT scan, as comfort of seeing an axial cut. And so, and in a somewhat off-label fashion, he used a trajectory of a quote screw, but really it was for his percutaneous transforaminal cannula that allowed him to get into Camden's triangle, to get into the disc space percutaneously. And all that was guided, and you can see the initial placement here after the screws are in. All that was done robotically, and look how aggressive these screws are. Now those will have great toe strength. Those will actually be really nice. Or if you look at a case like this where a person who is unfortunately riddled with some fairly significant metastatic disease, and his entire sacrum is eaten out and has tremendous back pain. And really, there's not a lot of good anatomy to typically place in instrumentation. And this is a nice case for a CT scan intraoperative confirmation choosing your trajectory based on what bone is able to be instrumented, and a nice robotic assistance with it. Because in a post-radiation patient, the least invasive surgery you can do would certainly have some benefit, like in this case. And you can see there's not a lot of good bone in the sacrum, especially on this right-hand side, to instrument. But so we can actively plan out screws that are reasonable, including iliac bolts and aggressive screws into the ilium that are all pre-planned in multiple planes, and also guiding where the screw heads go to simplify placement of the rod. So a good case for something to help facilitate, make life easier. Placement of the rod becomes much less difficult, and all done through stab incisions to help with pain. And you can see, even though these systems typically have reference arrays placed into a crest, and then they have another extra reference array placed in the opposite side of the hip in order to confirm that there's no skiving or no movement of the registered anatomy as a check on the system. And you can see you can place in these screws even despite having the arrays in place, which is nice. Person has a nice post-op result, has significantly less pain, and is able to be more functional as they have a very limited life expectancy. We've actually made it a lot easier for that person to survive. A strange case, which I think does kind of drive the message home though, which is a 13-year-old with idiopathic scoliosis presents with otherwise unremarkable medical history. And if you look at a procedure like this, where the person is going to require a significant thoracolumbar fusion, the question is, what do you think the best computer-assisted option is for that patient? Or is there a computer-assisted option for that patient? Is it something you should use fluoroscopy for? Would it benefit from a 2D or a 3D navigation system? Is there a robotic choice which makes it more valuable, that actually improves that person's results? And my concern is that in a flexible curve, we're going to have some problems with using anchors at the iliac crest. It's going to be hard to find multiple anchors. It's going to be very hard to do this with a 3D navigation solution, at least as they exist today. And so honestly, one of the questions we should ask in a 13-year-old female is, what is the patient's radiation exposure with the various types of modalities that can be used to help improve your results? You can certainly do it freehand, but that's a very aggressive curve. Standard fluoroscopy would give you a good feeling for what you're doing at that level, but is associated with some significant radiation, probably not as much as a CAT scan though. And the data on robotics and 3D nav is that people not only get the CAT scan radiation, but they also get the X-ray radiation. And I would argue that this really is a concern. And in fact, if you look at the data, you would say that the patient's risk of getting cancer long-term is actually a couple % just from having their scoliosis treated. And so then you look at the concavity of the curve and you see that some of the pedicles in the mid and upper thoracic spine are exceedingly small. And so again, which modality would you feel safest instrumenting that pedicle? Freehand, using fluoroscopy, or maybe a robot? But a robot not attached to that level, not referenced off that level, I would question if that gives you the ability in today's day and age. And that's really the point I'm trying to make, is that ultimately, especially in a patient that you're going to do osteotomies, rib resections on in order to get some significant curve reduction, you're going to see that maybe using something like, in this case, a 2D navigation solution, this one's TrackX, gives you the ability to see this level in real time, choose your trajectory, place in the screw at the same level, and then ultimately get a substantial correction of their deformity in a very hard case that, at least today's day and age, I'm not sure that there really is a good robotic type solution for. There is for some of these cases, and you can see that some of the cases I presented have some significant value, like the patient with metastatic disease, for example. And there are cases which are probably not appropriate at this point for robotics. If you look at Schuffelberger's data, he was using a X-ray guided solution, a regular X-ray guided solution, and he can get substantial radiation reduction. He can make it quicker using some of these devices, but not feeling like he needs to go all the way to a robot to help him do something that maybe a robot's not able to do at this point, at least perhaps not in his hands. And so that's really the take-home message here, is that there's some positives to these systems. They're really nice, significant add-ons to navigation systems. They have a lot of promise for the future. I think we all believe that, and we all know that to be true. And it certainly steadies your hand and makes you a better navigation surgeon for those of us that are navigation surgeons. The negative is some of the things I brought out earlier, is that they're not broadly applicable at this point. They can do a little more than percutaneous screws when you go a little off-label with them, but you are getting a feeling that there's so much more that's going to be, there's certainly more that's coming. It's just a matter of time before these things become much more valuable than perhaps they are at the moment. Do they change your workflow? Probably they do substantially. Is there an issue with no real-time confirmation? I would argue there is. And there needs to be the ability to re-register. For example, the last case I showed, the deformity case. They do that, they fix some of these issues. These things are going to become essentially standard of care at some point in the future. And thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today. We taking questions now or later, Luiz?
É. Doutor Luiz, tem que abrir teu microfone novamente.
Sorry, forgot. So, Bob, my first question to you is, we are in early stage of all these technologies. You start talking about the price of the robotic. The price of navigation is also super big. So you think as the thing evolves, there is a chance that the price comes down and the quality goes up? Because what I've seen is that all these technologies in not so good hands may be a big disaster, not a big help. You have to turn your phone, please.
You're correct. I thought that's really, those are two very good points. So first point was, is the technology going to get better? No question, is it going to get better? The technology life cycle for all of these technologies is that they will become less expensive, they will become more powerful, and it's the same for your car, your cell phone. Year over year, the growth in the technology, the capabilities is going to grow tremendously, and the cost is going to have to drop. There's no question that something that right now is inordinately expensive and can probably be at most one, maybe two in a very affluent hospital is something that's going to become much more standard of care and throughout. And you see that already. Fusion Robotics and like have come out with devices, and you see more and more of these navigation systems and the like that are geared towards less expensive options. So there's no question that's going to take place. But the second point you made, which I think is also really good, is that it doesn't take the place of common sense. Is that having a navigation system, do you remember when your car used to tell you to turn right and there was no road there? Is that the systems are not necessarily completely accurate at this point, and until they blend in some of this real-time confirmation, or they can solidify much more accurately to the real anatomy that changes over time, you need to use them as an adjuvant, but not as a completely a crutch. They need to be something that helps you, but not something you completely rely on. If it's something you completely rely on, you're going to run into problems. They're not that accurate. They're not that able to be, not able to give you the results of closing your eyes and doing surgery and letting it do it for you.
Great comment. More questions? So Bob, another question is, you start talking about the robotics being a surgeon or almost replacing a surgeon. So robotics removing a tumor, intradural tumor, or a robotic doing a difficult corpectomy, or robotic guiding the endoscope into small holes to precision. We are far from this, right?
Part of it is what is capable of being done, and part of it is the FDA, at least in the United States. The fully relying on something to do it completely on its own is something that is so far away from what the FDA is willing to even consider, that in the United States, this is not going to happen anytime soon. Can robots do some really amazing things? Robots that build cars can absolutely do those things. The same robots can be used in the United States and to do surgery. And in fact, some of the technologies that exist, the intuitive robot is an incredible device that literally can take tremors out of your hand, can make your movement 1/10 of what it is actually moving. You can sew vessels you can't sew. There's amazing things these technologies can do, but there needs to be, one, the technology needs to build to that point, and it's not there yet, to your point. And second, it needs to have it needs to be proven to be safe in a 6 sigma or a 12 sigma way, meaning that it needs to be proven to be very, very safe and very, very reproducible before anyone would be allowed to close their eyes and let the robot do it for them. And it's going to be very, very hard to get that type of device through the FDA, even if it existed today.
Let me quickly, I know that we may have more questions, not only from me, but can you please give a short idea what is track X? Because I doubt that between the 100 participants here, they have an idea what track X is, the 2D navigation.
Track X is an idea that taking some of the benefit of the navigation systems that are out there, but really just blending it into a fluoroscope so that a 2D X-ray machine, a C-arm, can give you the ability to be able to mimic live fluoroscopy. So able to do live fluoro type procedures using one X-ray and then periodically performing surgery over time. So it's basic 2D navigation in a way that is designed to work with a surgeon as they operate and continually take a few X-rays every now and then, which recalibrates the system and makes surgery more efficient and more accurate.
Alguma pergunta? Your talk was so clear that anybody has a question. So probably because we don't understand 10% what you said.
Actually, there's two questions on the chat, on the Q&A. One is, would you use this type of technology in outpatients or only in anatomy demanding cases? And the second, for the same author, is, would you think the spinal robotics will be similar to Da Vinci in the near future or in the decade or so?
I think that the technology is at a weird beginning, in my opinion. You have people trying to figure out what it's good at, and it's they're very large systems. They're very expensive systems. They're not really designed to do outpatient surgery. And so it really seems to be more hospital-based procedures. They're probably better at doing a middle type surgery, kind of, if it's very small, they have to have larger incisions. Typically, they need to have extra incisions for a reference arc, an extra pin in the hip. So there's a lot of extra incisions and such. So it becomes less minimally invasive in that sense. And then if you get very big, a lot of major deformities, especially in adolescents, are flexible, which are not ideal for these types of technologies. Adults, stiff degenerative procedures are probably ideal. And is that going to change? I think it will. Will it become Da Vinci? I think that the thing that made Da Vinci successful was that they found procedures that really made the technology, because it was a prostatectomy that couldn't be done as well without the robot. And so it was not just marketing, it actually had real value. Hair replacement turns out to be a very significant growth impetus for the Da Vinci device as well. So you look for procedures that need the value of a robot, and if you can figure that out, then that becomes very exciting, because that's when technology like this takes off. Otherwise, it's going to be marketing.
Bob, if I summarize what you said, is mainly the robotic as it is now, it's an expensive and not as good navigation, right?
I think it's a expensive navigation system that has little additional substantive value beyond a standard navigation system. So I probably agree with you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
That is two other questions that just came in the Q&A part. And probably these questions can be answered by any of the speakers, by experience or by data itself. One is the accuracy of the navigation system for percutaneous cervical screw fixation in the subaxial cervical spine. And the other one is the reality of the robotics in Brazil so far is very beginning, and we doesn't have a lot of devices and technology available. So people are asking if you have used something that have some value in the past and could recommend this for us by any chance.
But I think, Rodrigo, Carelli is asking about cervical pedicular screw, not percutaneous screw, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, pedicular screw, sorry.
He's not approved by FDA, like Professor Isaac said. So you can't use it.
I'm not even aware of any data
in cervical. There isn't, Professor Isaac. So it's not approved, and you can't go above T1.
Podemos dar continuidade aí, então, Rodrigo?
Yes.
Então, você introduz, por favor, o Igor, que eu estou conhecendo ele hoje. Igor, prazer em te conhecer, mas...
professor, grande honra.
Não, a honra é ter você aqui.
Primeiro, né, o Dr. Pimenta colocou aí, obrigado, Igor, por disponibilizar seu tempo aí para estar aqui com a gente essa noite. Realmente um grande prazer conhecer. O Dr. Igor de Castro, então, ele é um brasileiro, como vocês já perceberam no português dele aí. É carioca, né, lá da Universidade Federal Fluminense, ele é neurocirurgião. Hoje ele trabalha no Georgia Neurological Institute, trabalha com a parte de cirurgia minimamente invasiva. E ele, aceitou aí o nosso convite para participar hoje. A gente só tem a agradecer aí, espero que a gente, no final da aula aí, encha ele de pergunta aí, porque ele vai dar uma noção para a gente aí do que a gente pode esperar do futuro aí da robótica.
Professor Isaac, he actually gave 70% of my talk.
Yeah.
Talk about the prospecting the future and all that, but I just need you, not to correct him, but just to give a detail. My dad has his prostate removal in France, and there's a surgeon there that takes 4 prostate a day. 2 in the morning, he has 2 robots, 2 Da Vinci, he does 2 in the morning. The really thing that changed the whole history of Da Vinci wasn't prostate surgery, but was the sparing of the sympathetic and decrease the cause of erectile dysfunction. There's no better commercial to a man that after this after the surgery he used to have the sparing. He's for real. So that guy is amazing. I saw him operating. That's the only thing he does in his life, Professor Pimenta. 4 a day, he go in and out. 45 minutes is impressive. But this, he probably knew a lot better even before he started the robot. So let's just start here. Let me share my screen. Sorry, real quick here. But I was not kidding. Professor Isaac, he talked a lot about what I'm going to say. My topic, it's very, very philosophical, because when I talked to Murillo, he asked me to give you my talk and see what the robot can do in the future. And part of that is already answered by Professor Isaac. Well, let's just start. So that's my disclosure, really short list and really quick. Here's how I would like to start. Everybody probably watched that movie, I, Robot. And there's a scene when the detective go to interview the robot because he was suspicious to commit a crime. And he said, robot doesn't have any feeling, the robot, doesn't have any fear. And he asked us, like, robot will never write a symphony. Robot will never, paint a masterpiece. And the robot asked him, can you? If you can't do it, why you expect me to do it? I'm a creation of, a human being. So, internet, it's good, but nowadays we see with the COVID, with all the protests, and internet also spread fear. And WhatsApp was a great tool. I can talk to Professor Pimenta, I can talk to Rodrigo, my friend Carelli is watching us. But also, I receive stuff every day on the internet. I would like not to see it. And that's one of them. So you receive something like this. It's really scary. There's people out there doing what they're not supposed to do. That's like I give, my brother's a pilot. That's like my son, which is a 14-year-old, and my brother let him, land a 737-600. That's, so for people like who did this work, there is no robot, there is no navigation, there is nothing. He needs to go back in the lab, he needs to go back and hold the spine in his hand and see. He needs to learn from zero. So the technology is not going to help that person. And of course, we have to look, smarter people, a lot smarter than us around us, and see what they have to say about robot. And you see what Bill Gates said. The true genius in that picture is the one in the middle, Nikola Tesla. And if you really have a chance, I would recommend everybody when you go to Serbia to visit his museum. We talk about somebody that 100 years ago illuminate light bulbs from 60 miles away, wireless. So if we get somebody like an internship, if Professor Pimenta was an assistant of Nikola Tesla, the robot would be doing everything now. We could be stay at home, but nobody really followed his steps, and we lost a lot of stuff. And always remember the last quote there: the robots, were made, by human being again. So again, just reinforce what we have to know about anatomy. In 2009, I published that and gave, about the MIS history, and gave full credit to Professor Pimenta on the latter approach. But that's what we're standing now. So the Da Vinci was created in 1999, and so far until 2017, 5 million cases. There's 4,400 Da Vinci. I researched that because I had an idea how many we had spread all over the world. So if you look at the history of the robot, the ones that I use the most, which is, Medtronic, that's my bias on this talk, because that's the only robot system I get exposed. I got exposed a little bit to the Globus one, but by far Medtronic, 99% what I do. So I started in 2001 and assisted technology with the Israeli company. And mainly the Renaissance guide, we're gonna show what kind of Renaissance robot is, was developed 2011 in collaboration with Medtronic. And then the fancy one, the new robot, which is the free arm, was launched in 2016 in July. So again, I'm not gonna, Professor Isaac already talked about, accuracy, and this is just one of the works which have a lot of bias. The robot, being more precise, actually is who's doing the procedures, not really the robot. And then, recently the combination with the robot Maser X with navigation, just to give you another tool for difficult cases already, brilliantly presented by Dr. Isaac. So I'm gonna speed a little bit here. The thing that I like with the robot, especially because I don't work with residents, I work with my nurse practitioner, I work with some, fellows that come overseas, is the first thing is planning. So we knew before we start the case, it facilitates a lot for the scrub tech to have the size of the screws, to have more or less the size of the rod, what we're gonna do in that case, and the planning. And this permit also gives us, the capability to execute the plane very precisely. And with navigation, which is just a new tool, you can kind of verify opening what work you've done. So just that the technology I put like basic slides for people that are not exposed to robot, because when I didn't know what the robot is, I had no idea. So I put those pictures for you to see the C-arm in the left lower corner, the picture on the screen on the top, like how the robot playing the place with the screws, and the 3D reconstruction of the imaging, how it looks like in the OR with the preoperative pictures. That's exactly what you see on the tech from Medtronic, help you to do the planning. So it's very, very helpful. All very luxury. So I tell this to everybody, I like to have this, I like to have O-arm, I like to have robot, I like to have navigation, but this is all luxury. If I don't have a C-arm, I'll cancel my case. It's still nowadays. The C-arm is like my car. If I don't have my car, I can go to work. This C-arm is not working. Basic fluoroscopic guidance is what I use every day. So we just, repeating what we already talked, and for the complex case, and Professor Isaac showed a very beautiful case of scoliosis, how you can plan, and the robot can help in very small pedicles like he showed in the upper thoracic spine. The robot even can help you to direct that screw in the like Devereux technique when you go in between the head of the rib and the pedicle. What I love, the technique is like, it's very strong screw, even if you go outside the pedicle in the upper thoracic spine. So anyway, this is all, about the technology that we have is great and all that, but this topic is very philosophical. You have to just finish this part here. So the pin attached to the superior iliac crest, already explored by Professor Isaac. If you do a long construction, that will be away from your point of fixation. So we have to do another technique, which put bars and you put pins on spinal process. All that need to add if you do a very, very long construction. And then the robot arm on that picture on the superior part there, you can see very steady arm when you go and do. Long story short, we're talking about a very, very expensive machine that helps us a lot, but basically nowadays, the only thing we can do with it is to direct and position a screw. If I do screws percutaneously, the only thing I do with the robot is K-wire placement. And that's what it looks like in the OR. And if you do the case open, I think this video show you how you can see and follow, with navigation and the robot, how they introduce the screw. It was a very basic talk just to introduce you to the technology. So now, I left all this for Rodrigo and my friends there to look it up. I know you guys love research, I love you guys. And I left this long, extensive material for you to, research if you want to look those articles. So long story short, already been talked about high accuracy with the robot, very good technology. One of the series showed the comparison to freehand. Of course, some freehand is like Professor Isaac, the robot is against you because he has 0.35. But that's average. Nobody has in your service somebody like him everywhere. Violation of the facet, you can pre-plan that and avoid. And believe it or not, now that we have at least, I think we are around 380 cases robot, my fluoro time decreased significantly, especially for the percutaneous. I pretty much just obtained AP oblique to load those images on the robot station. And before I put the screws percutaneous, I look just another PA view just to see the position of the K-wires, and then I fire those screws. Very effective, very little fluoroscopic time. So just, what we all know, with MIS, smaller scarring, incision, less blood loss, short hospital stay, all that we're just talking about the same thing. Results are going to speed. There's already been talk about it. So the conclusion, again, it's nice to have it. It's very important to have it. And I think the technology is going to continue to progress. And for me, the most important thing, the least that I expose my staff and expose my patient and myself to radiation, the better, especially in the percutaneous surgery that we've been doing a lot. So just again to introduce, that's the old version. That's the very first version of the Renaissance robot. It looked like a little can of Red Bull, and you have to mount that platform on the patient's iliac crest and spinous process, and that robot is going to contour, and you attach the arm, and you're going to fire those K-wires from there. And that is the new generation. When you put the pin on the superior iliac crest, and the robot will be attached to the table and the patient, and then the robot is going to move around and give you the trajectory I'll show here. So the sequence is pretty much the same. You give local anesthetic to the skin, make the incision, the robot knife, we call robot knife, dilators, withdrew inside the pedicle, place a little reduction tube in the K-wire. And then you keep going percutaneous until, you have all the K-wires in. And, it's good. I mean, very, very precise surgery. This patient was really fun. And the reason I put this slide, I always show pre-op and post-op pictures to my patients, and I showed this slide to the patient. He looked at me and said, Dr. Castro, you said you're going to put 2 rods, and there's only 1 in there. So you have to show that the PA, this is just like a very good precision on the lateral, and the patients nowadays, they question everything. Again, one thing I like to talk about the robot, if you're very exhausted at the end of the day, and you have to rely on your free hand, you'll be tired. If my daughter has fever, I'm not the same surgeon. At the end of the day, I want to go home and see her. That's a nice tool to have the robot. Robot has no feeling. The same way he's going to perform in the morning, he's going to perform in the afternoon. He's going to help you to put those screws in there. And after, exhausting very vascular tumor resection like this, the first thing you want is just to get out of there, and then the robot help you after the resection to put those screws in the pedicle and stabilize that spine. That's a very, very nice tool. That's all the good stuff we have to talk about the robot. I placed another case. That's a very unique case. First time in my life, I did a case that I saved the jockey, but the horse died on that accident. A very traumatic accident that, and you don't believe that things like this happen in the United States, but this was operated in a very rural area here in Georgia. What they did, everything they should never done for this patient. So they transformed this 3 column injury in this patient in a 4 because they took all the facets and the lamina. They make this situation a lot worse just in an attempt to give some relief to the skull decline. The patient was complete. When I get to the patient, I repeat the CT to plan my surgery. The fragment's full in the canal. You see he has a little bit, and this is like the transition of the cone there. Very high lumbar, low thoracic. We have the robot. I opened this patient in the middle, but I placed the K-wires percutaneously. I opened the middle and impact that fragment in there. Because of liability, I was afraid this patient already had the first surgery, really trouble. We shot a myelogram, and you can see the reduction was really after decompress and distract this patient. The reduction was really good. The canal was really good with the myelogram. So I was happy. And took 6 months. He went to Miami. He's a jockey and took 6 months, but that's the result that we have. Could you do the surgery without a robot? Yes. But, you know, this was a very stressful event. At 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody already had the first surgery done, not in a good way, and we have to be precise. So that was a very, very helpful tool. So you can see he still have a lot of deficit, but he's able to walk without any assistance. Now the philosophical part of the talk, which is already addressed by Professor Isaac again. What's the expectation of the robot doing, you know, surgery in the future? I think if we're gonna be there, it's gonna be exactly like the same thing as the Da Vinci. He's gonna be playing with video game, and the robot is just gonna enhance the skill and the precision that we have. I put the over 30 applications in medicine, all those companies, not only in the spine, but everywhere. Professor Isaac showed a slide very similar with all the patents around robotic. You can see how he's jumped from 1990 to 2017, almost 400 every year now. The future, you know, is a very, very expensive technology, but they think it's going to explode in 2020. But for everything here in this slide, there was a very busy slide. It is an important message, you know, with the reduce what the insurance is paying the surgeon. The hospitals are going to be more and more pay attention who has a better result. You know, somebody like Professor Isaac, Professor Pimenta, they don't need robot. They can put the pedicle screw very precisely, but a lot of people can do that, and the hospital is going to be really, really interesting to decrease that. And the robot is a good tool for that. That's the center that measure over the 100 counts, and that's where we have in the United States nowadays. As you guys see, there are a lot of states that don't even have the technology yet. Florida, for some reason, they have robots in every corner there. And does anybody recognize what slide is this? So that's 1996 when Gasparov lost his first match to the computer. He was like speechless, he was desperate, but it was just a matter of time. It's not that the computer is smarter than him, it's not that the computer is better than him, it's just the computer is faster than him. You know how Professor Pimenta, I know he likes to run, how he's gonna compete to run against on a bike or against on a car. It's the same principle. You know, not that the computer just beat him because he has more options in a fraction of a second. And then we start to go into medicine, and then we have the computers reading X-rays and CAT scans with better precision than radiologists. Then there's the issue. Then you see artificial intelligence, you know, kicking in and kind of, you know, making us think twice and make us, you know, need to get better for sure. If we get robots to do something, we have to respect the 3 laws of Asimov. And that was in the movie that I mentioned at the very beginning of this talk. The robot cannot injure any human being and cannot, you know, allow any human being to come to harm. The robot must obey orders given by the human beings, except when those laws inflict the first law. And third, they can protect their own existence, but that cannot conflict the first and second law. This is very important if we get there. Maybe it'd be 100 years, maybe it'd be 1,000 years, but those laws need to be respected to avoid, you know, harm. Still, do no harm will be our, you know, maximum in medicine. I can tell much about the future, but it's just, you know, belong to the beauty of their dreams. I remember always the story when I go to a friend of mine, he's a tech and he works at Apple. He said everybody laughed when the Steve Jobs asked the engineer to put the camera on the phone. The engineer looked at him and said, Steve, you crazy. Everybody has a digital camera. Why do you need a camera on the phone? And we see that every single person on the planet nowadays have a phone with a camera. So we need people crazy like him, you know, to change the future. And that's, now just to close the talk, since it was a very philosophical talk, I put that in just to honor Professor Pimenta. I know he likes to run, and so the robots outperforming the human being in every aspect. you're never going to be able to enjoy that. So I'm open to questions. I left more papers, for everybody to see, and I'm open for questions. And please feel free to ask anything. Rodrigo, please.
Great talk.
There you go.
Igor, may I ask you a question? So when you talk about the precision of the robotics, what I was thinking is that you are using the precision of the navigation.
No. When I do percutaneously, I very rarely use navigation. I only use
robotics.
Because what I do is we get a CT pre-op, Professor. With that CT pre-op, we download and we load on the robot station. And during surgery, you have to have acquisition picture, a PA and oblique X-ray. So a 2D view, and the robot to calculate the coordinates and send the arm to place those K-wires. But I never trust the robot alone. So once the K-wires, and with 300 Ks, you start to feel where the bone, you drill just a little bit and feel. Once those K-wires in place, I always obtain an AP and a lateral view. And then you can see on the X-ray that your K-wires are in good position. Okay. That was my mistake not putting that in the talk, but I just tried to speak.
Gustavo, você está com o som liberado. Pode fazer a pergunta direto.
First of all, I would like to congratulate Igor and tell him that I finished my graduation at UF as well. And I would like to ask, looking at the robot surgery from now, what you see that will be the next step of the evolution of the robot surgery?
So, it's funny because this is a good question. So I send a robot for the MIS, placement of the K-wires, and then we start to deal. Professor Pimenta knows that he works here and he sees patients here. We have a population of extra ultra obese patients. I'm not exaggerating if I tell that we put people on the table and they're like 400 pounds. When you do MIS in these people, which we have to do because I like to decrease infection, I like not to have wound infection or CSF leak, I start to send a robot for the T-lift trajectory too. So what I do, I send a K-wire, I just drill like 0.5 centimeter or 1 centimeter in the facet, and I dock my MetRex tubes, which Rodrigo is familiar with, for those MetRex tubes around the K-wire. And of course, it's always the number 9 centimeter. It's the 9, or sometimes you go, have to use lateral retractors to go in those people if you want to do MIS. So that's one step that so it's only allow you to put pedicle screws and K-wires on the pedicle, but I use for trajectory of my T-lift. I think in the future, you can use that to do your drilling, to stabilize your hand, to do drilling. I think that will be, one advance. To be honest, I think it's going to be exactly like the Da Vinci, when you're going to have a robot set up on top of the patient, and your technique or your skills is going to be just enhanced by the robot. So you move 1 centimeter, the robot's just going to move 1 millimeter, and the precision is going to be way high. That's, I think, would be the next step on the technology.
Obrigado, Igor. Tem mais uma pergunta da plateia ali, do Alex. Ele está perguntando para você quanto que você teve que mudar da sua prática no início para adotar nessas novas tecnologias, e quanto tempo você acha que você levou para poder colocar isso no seu workflow de trabalho, assim, para chegar, digamos assim, num nível de excelência?
Minha prática hoje, eu não faço degenerativo, vocês estão way ahead in front of me. Eu faço, praticamente clínica privada, eu faço no máximo 3, 4 níveis de livre, faço muito lateral e complemento com parafuso percutâneo posteriormente. Inicialmente, eu usava 2 arcos em C, porque eu colocava esses K-wires, o feed kitchen, com a Jamshid needle. Muita radiação. Então, a transição foi de 2 arcos em C, colocação desses K-wires, e eu partia para a parte MAS do T-leaf, por tubo, ou por até aberto. Quando eu tive a oportunidade de usar a tecnologia de robô, o que facilitou foi a colocação, era o que eu precisava. Eu precisava de uma tecnologia para me ajudar a colocar o K-wire sem usar 2 arcos em C e muita radiação para cada nível. E hoje, praticamente, eu uso 2 arcos em C. O único procedimento que hoje eu uso 2 arcos em C é para colocação de parafuso e odontoide. Porque eu não confio em navegação e eu acho que é muito, muito perigoso você tentar fazer aquilo com navegação se você não sabe onde está o fragmento. Você tem que ser uma cirurgia que ainda você vai depender muito da visualização a live do que está acontecendo. Então, minha transição não foi muito complicada. Eu passei de 2 arcos em C para o robô e o robô passou a me ajudar na colocação dos K-wires. E se eu faço aberto, aí sim eu posso usar a navegação, que a navegação está acoplada no drill, está acoplada no próprio Midas Rex, está acoplada no pointer, está em tudo. Então, você conseguiria, você merge, né, uma tecnologia na outra. Não teve muita dificuldade na transição.
Uma pergunta, a question. Ask a question in English because we have other English speaking. Do you envision robotic in lateral surgery?
That's very interesting. I was thinking with myself when I put those slides together. I think we're still going to need to open and to know the anatomy. The problem is, like, this is 90% of the surgery. And if you do a proper open, if you preserve the nervous plexus, and so the robot pretty much is going to help you just with the cage placement, maybe. But the thing will be interesting, Professor Pimenta, because that's one of the surgeries I still use a lot of CR, especially when I'm preparing the disc space. A lot. I learned
something in between these technologies. We may have a solution or partial solution. Can I ask Bob Isaac's opinion on that? Bob, can you please talk a little bit, 2 minutes, on the same topic, on the help in lateral surgery? What is difficult in lateral surgery for any navigation robotic technology?
In my opinion, the issue is the same one that was just brought up, and the one I've talked about as well, is that it works really well when you can anchor the device directly to something that's relatively stable, because at that point, all navigation systems rely on a fixed anchor, rely on being attached effectively to the anatomy that the CAT scan or the image was taken of. In lateral, there is so much movement of the spine relative to, because of positioning, it's very hard to stabilize it. And so unless you can put something directly in those bones, it's going to shift as you do things like mallet and take out the disc, put a cob across it. And so it becomes a very challenging situation to try to stabilize enough for a robot or for, honestly, for navigation. And I would actually ask the panelists, is anyone doing laterals with navigation at this point?
Yeah, so actually I was gonna comment on that. I know probably Louise asked that. I actually do all my laterals with navigation now. And I can tell you sort of the way that we overcame that, which is really doing prone laterals. So PTP allows us access to the spinous process, or PSIS. I actually prefer the spinous process. And we can navigate off of the spinous process. So you very easily put an array on the spinous process, because when you're in the lateral position, 2 things happen. Number one, it's awfully hard to find an anchor point, which allows you good access and good, 3D or even 2D navigation. So the prone fixes that problem by giving you the spinous process or the PSIS. The other thing it does is that you don't require such a break in the table. And the break in the table becomes a little bit of a problem, you know, when you're trying to do, you know, either fluoro matching or you're trying to move the spine. I would say the biggest problem that we haven't fixed is sort of the segmental problem. So in other words, you do one level and then all of a sudden it makes the other level look a little bit different. So that's the same robotic problem that you run into with the segmentation. But the prone portion of that has really allowed us to use navigation. Secondly, I would say that we started playing around with the robot assisting in the prone lateral surgery, and that really has to do with the initial placement of the dilator in the lateral position, because it's a very simple thing for that robot to find the middle of the disc space and to find that point in space, and that's really what you want it to do. So if you can create a safe working corridor and then put that down. Now, what I really like about your TrackX when I looked at that is I call that sort of the beginnings of augmented reality. I mean, the targeting system that you have on there and the way you display it, to me, is augmented reality. And I don't know what you call it. Maybe you have a different name for it. But if indeed you can then marry not just navigation and robotics, but neuromonitoring, then you have something that you can really start working with the lateral. So I think that we're sort of on the way. It's not much more than putting a K-wire or a rigid dilator into the appropriate spot to drill down for the lateral aspect.
Yeah, may I add something, because you spoke a language that most people didn't understand. When we were talking here about lateral surgery, at least between the 99% of the participants here, they would think in the patient in lateral. And
right.
what they may not know is that we are doing lateral in the prone position. So the patient is much more stable, moves much less, and is well fixed in the Jackson table. So that's what you are talking about. So just
I mean, that's exactly right, Louise, and that's a perfect point that I missed, because the reality is that we have to anchor the patient to the table a little bit better when we're in the lateral position, which again leaves itself or much more likely to be able to do navigation. So I think that the combination of those things are going to make it much more easy to use the navigation in the lateral position. And then, you know, Louise never rests, you know what I mean?
We both. By the way, now that Bill came to the podium here, I didn't introduce him. And the best introduction is that we probably are talking 2 blocks away. He is in his house with a nice Hawaiian background, but the really thing is he lives in my street. And I'm 2 blocks from him. I could quickly go to his house now and come back and continue the talk. But anyway, Bill is one of the smartest neurosurgeon here in United States. Is the head of spine at UCSD San Diego. And I'm proud to be his partner for the last almost 20 years.
Well, you know, that's not true. I was at a meeting before and they asked me who my mentor was, and I said Luis Pimenta. So, you know, that's really the way I look at it. I follow Luis along as quickly as I possibly can. Every time I end up arguing with him about something, he turns out to be right. He's sort of like my wife in that way. You know what I mean? I can never win one over. But, you know, we've been working on a few things. And I, do you want me to go ahead and
please,
share the
please.
screen now?
Thank you, Igor. Was very good. Thank you. Big honor to have you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, but we will continue the discussion. Okay. Keep
yes.
Another
going, please.
Panel at the end, so you can, if you can wait until the final.
I will. Yeah.
The final.
I blocked.
If you want to ask some,
Rodrigo tonight.
if you want to ask some questions, you can go ahead right now. It's not a problem. Do you want me to go ahead?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I feel a little bad because I going going here, pretty much as you might expect, almost everything that I'm going to discuss has been sort of asked. And I would also say a lot of the things that I wanted to discuss, which I think are really important, were asked in the question period. So people are really thinking about this. And I look at robotics and navigation a little bit different. I can tell you I'm a big fan of navigation. I'm not a huge fan of robotics just because of the way my practice is, but I have a lot of partners who are big fans of robotics. And I think what I may be able to do is to sort of show you what happened here at UCSD and sort of how we got here. My feeling is that people are worried about training and other things robotics, but nothing substitutes for experience is what I think. But I do think robotics and computer-assisted navigation comes pretty close. That is really a nice thing that we sort of gloss over pretty quickly, is that robotics and computer-assisted navigation give us that leg up when maybe we haven't done as many cases as Louise has done, and we haven't seen so many revisions and so many deformities, and we have a feeling for what needs to be done next. And I do think that we can talk about workflow, we can talk about sort of cost savings, and we can talk about sort of where we're at in the next 10 or 15 minutes. I would remind everyone when we talk about navigation, we're talking almost exclusively, which is what Rob just gave a nice presentation on, was computer-assisted navigation, in which you have a fixed array. And then Igor talked about how his workflow is exactly what we do, where you have a fixed array, you match a prior CT scan, but you're not really using the navigation piece as much, which really means you're not sort of watching the screws go in under navigation. The computer-assisted navigation is sort of like a GPS machine. You have a fixed array, you have a transmission from your instrument that you use that goes back to a device that reads that and tells you where it's at. I would add that there are other ways to do navigation. Electromagnetic navigation is going to come out. I will bet that Rob probably at least has 1 or 2 patents on electromagnetic navigation. The problem with electromagnetic navigation is that there's a lot of artifact within that. But the nice thing about it is you can use flexible instruments. So we are limited to navigation with fixed and with rigid instruments, but with electromagnetic you don't need that. It sort of builds a box and then it tells you where that instrument is in space, but the vast majority of things we're losing is that. I would just remind you, this is my favorite slide. We talk about prostate surgery all the time because of the Intuit robot and the Da Vinci robot, which talks about prostate surgery. People have forgotten this study, and basically what this says is that if you look here at greater than 1,000 cases, keeping everything else pretty much in the same distribution, that people that have more than 1,000 cases still have better positive surgical margins, better 5-year probability of recurrence, which is less than you do in your least 50 cases, and we continue to learn over time. I do think that there's a learning curve which the robot and computer-assisted navigation can help, but nothing substitutes for experience. So even though we've done 999 cases, you still get better after 1,000 cases. These are my disclosures. I have none, except that Luis promised he would bring over some good wine next time that I came over, walked up to his house. He does live about two blocks up above me. The second disclosure I have is that probably most of you have seen all the YouTube and the ViewMedi and Google. This is essentially where I steal everything from. Uribe and Rob Lehman and Lieberman have done a lot of talks on this. The 2 talks you heard are way past what I know about this, and so I've probably stolen things from people in the audience and also from these guys. The real question is, and someone asked that earlier, is why should your hospital buy a robot? And that's why do the administrators in the hospital, why do they tolerate this expense on a robot when they give you a hard time about spending a few $100s on a revision case with some infuse or something like that? And the fact of the matter is that if you get a robot and if you're doing prostate surgery, you increase your numbers of prostate surgery astronomically, you increase your profit, and you don't really decrease the number of cases. So you're not stealing cases from yourself by doing robotics. So what they found out in looking at the numbers is that the robots generated cases when you're doing the prostate. And you heard that from Igor just a second ago. Why do they generate cases? And the reason they generate cases is because people think the outcome is better. And that's the real problem we have with spine, is that people are not worried about outcome. They talk about RVUs, they talk about cases, but as surgeons, we don't argue that my outcomes are better than yours. We might argue my patients leave sooner, or I have this, or I did this many cases, or I'm this fast, but we don't argue outcome. But when you're talking about urinary control and sexual function, that's really the argument. Now the overwhelming problem is that they have sold people who are getting prostate surgery essentially a bill of goods, because the reality is at 12 months, even though the recovery time is faster, for most studies, there's no difference between prostate surgery with a Da Vinci, with a robot, and without one. The only thing that matters is experience of the surgeons when they do it. The reality is that this is a marketing system that has increased the hospital's ability to get cases, and it's increased the ability for us to think that we're getting a better outcome with the robot surgery, and that may not be the case, and that's a real problem, because I don't know at the moment whether the robot for spine is going to turn out to be the next artificial lumbar disc, or it's going to turn out to be something which is really useful, and I don't think we know at the moment. But the fact is that there's a lot of money thrown behind robots, and the vast majority of that money is the idea that, number one, it's going to expand in the future and be more useful. Number two, it worked in prostate surgery and hair transplant and multiple other things, so it's going to work in spine. And I'm not still convinced that that's the case. So what happened to us here at UCSD? And that's really the only useful information I think I can share with people, especially someone asked the question about what robot should we buy, essentially, or when do we need one? And here's what we have done. They redid part of the hospital, and so we had a 4-room suite. In that one suite, we have a BrainLab CT. It's a 2-room suite. It's non-mobile, the BrainLab Aero, so it slides between rooms. You cannot use it simultaneously. The idea being you can do one case and then you have to put it away, and then you can do another case in the other room. So we have one suite of 2 rooms with a CT scan in between. We have another suite on the other side of a BrainLab MRI suite, in which we have an MRI in the middle, and then we have 2 rooms on either side in which we use the MRI suite. I can talk to you for a long, long time about what a ridiculous idea this was and is. They don't allow outpatient MRI scans. It makes no cost sense at all. It's not mobile. The bed is always a problem because you have to use a specific bed. We essentially can't even use the MRI suite rooms for standard cases because it costs them so much money to make sure that all the metal is out of the room after we're done. So in fact, on most days, the MRI suite rooms sit empty with a $1 million MRI scan in between, and the BrainLab CT gets used essentially by me and a couple other people. You have to really have a contract with the company, with BrainLab and with other people, to bring a tech. We also have an outpatient contract company if we have too many cases at once we can use. And then we have an O-arm now. The O-arm came from Medtronics and sort of a deal we can talk about in a second. And we have all of that. For our robotics, we have a 3rd-generation spine robot from Mazor. Remember, the nice thing about the Mazor compared to the other robots is they're on their 3rd generation at the moment, which is just what Igor talked about. An excellent thing. We use a ROSA for intracranial and adult, and then we have a ROSA in children's hospital, and those are almost essentially completely used for placement of intracranial leads for epilepsy and other things. And this is where we are now. And the real question is, why are we here? We're here because there's concern that if you don't keep up with the robot technology, you are going to sometime lose cases. At the moment, no one comes in asking for the robot that I'm aware of, but the estimate, and this is from Dr. Juan Uribe, is that once the penetration reaches about 30% of the country, other places are going to close down, and they're not going to be doing the same numbers of spine surgery. That's exactly what happened with the prostate surgery. If you don't have the Da Vinci, then you lost out and you really had to shut down and stop doing prostate surgery. What do I hate about this? What do I think is really complete marketing and complete nonsense is that, number one, they said we're giving you this robot and this thing for free, right? They're going to give it to the hospital, but how do we do that? We have to earn that out with pedicle screws. So the price that we pay for the robot is really a contract to work for the company store, which in this case happens to be Medtronic's, to earn out the cost of that robot by using pedicle screws. It's their right to take away those instrumentation at any time if we don't meet their minimums of pedicle screws. It's almost mandatory to have a sales rep in the OR when you're there. It's not completely mandatory. They really, and I'm aware of some cases where they won't let you use competing instrumentation because, as Igor showed us and Rob showed us, these are really guidance devices. So you can put a K-wire, or you can put a drill down these, and you can put any screw in to follow. But the idea being is that we have these systems provided to us, and I think it's really too good to be true. I would tell you that in our hospital, we've had some issues with this robot. We've had one 14-hour 2-level TLIF, and I think that it's turned out to be a little bit of a difficult thing because people think they're going to use the robot without really any training. I would say that this case, I looked online. You really don't have to search for it, but I looked online and someone published this case about a 1-level L5S1 robotically assisted TLIF with these great screws and this cage and these little incisions like that. And it just got me thinking is if you can't do this case, either open or minimally invasive, and you need the robot to do this case, then I think we're really in trouble. Don't ask me for recommendations on what to buy. You can see, I can tell you the mistakes we made more than I can tell you what to do. There's 20 spine, if you look at Becker's, there's 20 navigation systems out on the market, probably. You're supposed to know all 20 of them, and each place has a different thing that they use. I would say that in general, the list over here has a few things that I think are really critical. I like the TrackX system because, as I talked to Rob, I think it sort of adds sort of, augmented reality with the targeting. I would say that the Brain Lab is something I find very interesting. They have a semi-autonomous arm that I think really functions just like the robot we have now, but is not going to expand. And a lot of the other ones all have something in there. What are we talking about? We talk about robots, and you just talked about the three things, and Igor and Bob both mentioned this, is we are not ever going to be in the first type of robot where it's completely autonomous. So essentially the Da Vinci system is designed to mitigate and to enhance the surgeon's movements. So you absolutely are correct. With the Da Vinci system, I have seen people reanastomose ureters. I've seen them put nerves back together, and there's lots and lots of things, small blood vessels, which the robot can assist you in doing, where you have remote command of every single piece. The second type of robot is sort of autonomous but performed under close supervision. And then the third is sort of co-autonomy, and that's really where we are in the spine era, is that we set up the robot, we tell it what to do, we stand and watch it, but we control the motion at the same time. What we have found at our institution is that if you do not take the time, and it's found in studies too, which you can see here, Hugh and Shotlow and other people have been studies which they sort of, how do we learn to use it? If you don't take the time to train your team and you don't take the time to train your nurses, you don't take the time to train your assistant, you are not going to have a good experience with this. So it really is a team game, this learning curve. And neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons and spine surgeons really think they've invented this learning curve. And the fact is the learning curve, just like the early adoption curve and other things, are really well known throughout all of industry. This is a MIS TLIF. We looked at the first 60 cases, and the interesting thing is that certainly they're longer in the beginning, but you still have outliers. But generally the trend is to improve. Time is shorter, our retractor time is shorter, the skin-to-skin time with outliers. And this here workflow, this is from Juan Uribe's talk, in which he shows the plot on the left, which essentially shows that there's almost no learning curve with the robot that he's using. So he, if you listen to his talk on, which I've heard a couple times, I know Louise and I heard it in New York, and I've seen it on ViewMedi. He really has an excellent, the robotic talks seem to fall into two different categories. Either somebody giving you a lot of information about pedicle screw accuracy and cost savings, and then some people talking just about sort of philosophical parts of the robot. And basically what Juan found out in looking at his first cases, these are the first 20 cases or so, is that they were all over the place. And he can really tell you why he thinks that is. But I would tell you that the learning curve on the robot is not smooth, nor is it typical. Typical learning curve looks like this. I mean, you're asking about the cost. Someone asked about, Louise, I think, asked about what happens to cost. Why does the cost go down? The cost goes down because we learn how to do things better. It's the same story when people started doing X-lifts. They would say, well, you know, I had a nerve problem, so what I do is I spin the retractor around 4 times before I put it in, and I do a little dance, and then I don't have a nerve problem anymore. Well, that's, of course, nonsense. What they've done is gotten better and faster at the surgery, and that's exactly what happens to us. So if you look, an 80% learning curve is just about around 10 cases where the curve starts to flatten out. And that's pretty much where we are with most things. The robot doesn't seem to do that. The learning curve is not as steep, it's much flatter, and it's much more difficult when you do that. And I think the robot versus navigation is really not a combination of arguing between the two, but the combination of the two, where we're really going to finally see success. And if you look at the robotics specifically, it's really segmental technology. So the re-registration piece, and I think it was Rob that mentioned that in the beginning, or someone asked him a question. The re-registration time frame is just really, really difficult. The loss of tactile feedback and cross-tack error is the same as Igor talked about with skiving. You know, you put something in and it really doesn't go to where you want it to go. Navigation really relies on all of array placement and line of sight and heads-up display and all kinds of different problems. But they're separate problems, but married together, I think that you get the advantage. And where do you get this advantage? And it was mentioned earlier, pre-op planning. I hate pre-op planning. I hate looking at the things. I don't want to do any pre-op planning. But the fact is, if you can do pre-op planning and you can take that cost savings into less implants, less trays, less equipment, less sterilization, and you can turn it then into an MIS procedure. My colleague is a open surgeon, but he uses the robot, in this case I'll show you at the end, essentially making a midline incision, going through the fascia in the midline to do his decompression and osteotomies, and then using a separate incision through the fascia and muscle. And he calls this an MIS procedure, so he doesn't have to visualize the anatomy. Reduced X-ray exposure and probably some significant increased accuracy, although accuracy should be graded, just as Rob said, by revision cases and whether you have neurologic injury. And the fact is, there's not a lot of difference in neurologic injury between navigation, robotics, and freehand. And also, as Igor talked about specifically, stress reduction, being tired, the robot does not get under stress. challenging cases get easier. So all of these things I really think lead us to advantages of navigation and robotics, even before we get to the idea of the robotics doing the drilling and working on their own, which is a long way away. MIS procedures are made easier. Pedicle screw placement, as you can see, there's tons and tons of studies looking at the accuracy, and in general, they sort of say, you know, robotics are better. The reality is, if you look at a lot of them, the freehand and robotic technique is not really that much difference. And if you look at revision rates and neurologic injury rates, not a huge difference. The real improvement in accuracy with robotic surgery comes with revision, deformity surgeries, and more difficult surgeries, in that you lose the anatomic landmarks. And that's really what you see with these studies. We see a massive decrease in radiation exposure, which is really nice to be able to do. And the idea that this is going to save money, how is it going to save money? It's going to save money in the long run by reducing revisions. And if we continue to improve accuracy and reduce revisions and reduce complications, you can really save a lot of money. The reality is that avoiding revisions in all the studies is the way that you save money, and that's really what you look at. There's an MIS refresh study which is out there, which is just ongoing, showing a decrease in revisions. Spine assist study with spine assist robot, half as many revision surgeries, and that's where we look. If you can save a revision, you save about $100,000 a case, and so you're saving the hospital money. You're not going to save the hospital money in time. You're not going to save the hospital money in anything other than preventing revisions and complications, and that's what we really have to show for our cost benefit and radiation exposure. Simple case. We've been here for almost over an hour, so you guys are probably all ready to get home to your families. But simple case, this is how we use the robot. 61 years old, 3 prior decompressions. He's got stenosis. We're going to do a midline incision and do a T-lift. He's got an autofusion at 5-1, and we'll put pedicle screws in from 4-1, and we'll use the robot to place those pedicle screws through a separate, we'll call it minimally invasive, incision. So we're going to use this transmuscular, and we'll use the robot without the navigation. So exactly what Igor talked about is when we use the robot many times, the loss of navigation just means that you're not watching the screw go in. How do we do that? By changing the workflow around a little bit. Post-op, I think it's really, really, really nice. What you get, especially with the CT scan post-op, you can see down here, you can absolutely place the S1 screws just so they're just barely transcortical. You can get long screws perfectly placed in exactly the right location. And I think you can see on the bottom right, I mean, we're just right up against the cortex and the placement of the S1 screws, and you really get that very, very well with this. So what we do in those cases, which is the most common thing that we do, pre-op CT. If we don't have a pre-op CT, we can do an intraoperative CT. We don't use the navigation. We'll do the decompression if we want to. We'll do it open, and then we'll put a pin into the PSIS. We'll do fluoro matching. We'll use the robot with a guidance anchored to that. We'll insert the K-wires and place the screws, and then do the T-lift. And then often we'll do a CT scan at the closure, and then the recovery. And this is sort of a general workflow over here that we use. And so, sorry, the value at the end, I really think is going to be in pre-op planning, efficiency, radiation exposure, cost savings. And I think future is going to be assistance, which you already asked about with the lateral. We sort of talked about how that is. We're going to start to see augmented reality in which Rob, I know, is already working on. Implant placement, and I've seen a robot, and I've evaluated one which, while the surgeon is standing on one side, he's doing the drilling on the other side, which absolutely can be done by a robot. But it's very unlikely that the FDA, as we've talked about already, is going to approve that. So that's really sort of a partial philosophical and a partial data-driven plan of how we use the robot and sort of where we're at UCSD, where I think you might be able to convince the cost savings, and why the robot has become such a marketing tool, and why everyone's demanding that the spine companies, they're really translating this prostate and Da Vinci into what we do. And I have a concern that what we do is completely different and not predicated on the same outcomes that we have. The horrible case I think that Igor showed, where we had screws right through the spinal cord, that's not a typical case. Whereas if you have better outcomes in continence and sexual function, that's going to be something which people find really, really important. So that's sort of where we're at. And I think what we sort of do with the robot here, where we're at. So thanks for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can stop.
I'm sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lost my, after we went over an hour. Oh, there we go.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it definitely went over an hour. I lost my squaring machine, so go ahead.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Bill. Can I, you are a great teacher, and I heard a while ago from you that the residents, they love so much the navigation that they cannot learn to do freehand. Yeah. Can you elaborate a little bit on this? Means almost what happens if the surgeons start doing minimal invasive surgery and they don't know where the spine is if they open the skin.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny, because I know you heard the same thing when we first started doing percutaneous pedicle screws. The argument was, well, you're doing percutaneous screws, the residents aren't going to know what the anatomy looks like. They're just looking at the fluoro machine. So we have sort of been through that already. I mean, the fluoro was going to take away their general anatomy, but that really didn't happen. And all of the useful fluoroscopic anatomy that we had to learn, and how to feel where the pedicle was and where the facet was, and transverse process, all that has gone out the window now. The residents like doing new technology, and they like using the navigation. They don't like spending more time because their day is long enough as it is. So their concern is trying to limit and trying to get more efficient. I do worry that they're going to lose some of that experience that we had in doing that. I can tell you that there are certainly still lots of people putting freehand pedicle screws in. So at our institution, there are lots of people that put freehand pedicle screws in. At some point, though, the navigation piece specifically is going to become almost ubiquitous when people put screws in. And the reality is that since we do a lot percutaneously, a lot minimally invasively, we don't look at the anatomy. But the fact is, a lot of people are using navigation and robotics for putting pedicle screws in open cases where they have the anatomy completely exposed. So I think you'll see a combination of those two. I am not worried about their ability to place pedicle screws, as long as they can continue to learn from everybody as they're doing it. And I think that we're going to continue to see an advance and a decreased freehand technique and an increased navigation technique before.
Very good. Any question? Yeah, Bill. For me, all the three talks are excellent, but at the end, the one thing that looks to me is that both technologies work much more as a marketing tool than a real advantage. Although marketing tool is also important. If we don't have a good marketing tool, we don't have patients. do you happen to have patients that comes to you and ask, oh, do you have a navigation to do my spine? Or do you have a robotic surgery into my spine or not?
So that is the exact thing that happened with the Da Vinci, right? People said, well, I'm not going to get my prostate done without the robot. Without the Da Vinci. That's the way to do it. Outcomes better and everything else. We don't have that yet. Now, I don't have people coming to me and saying, you know, do you have navigation? Do you have robotics? And I don't have people coming and seeking that. Now, I can tell you, one of my colleagues who's just started, younger guy, he is a social media master. He is on every case he does goes on social media. He posts things all the time. He follows up on things, and he is very, very adept at marketing, not so much himself, but just getting the word out for what is out there. And so more likely what happens is that other surgeons, and this sounds great to medical doctors or neurologists or someone else, other doctors see his posts and say, hey, I'm going to send you to this guy doing robotics. And the patient says, oh, okay, that sounds good. Now, I will tell you that I think there are probably lots of institutions now that have people seeking robotics. We don't have that yet. We have sort of that referral pattern through this social media presence to physicians and other things, but not so much patients. The first robot in our area was at really a community hospital. And that community hospital made a huge effort. Radio ads, TV ads, everything saying, we've got the robot. And in fact, it didn't really, according to anyone, drive business. I'd be interested to hear what both Igor and Rob have to say about that as to whether they think that that's the case or not. Because what I found is that what happens in my hospital doesn't necessarily work or is the same as what happens in someone else's hospital.
I was, most of the time I get a lot more asked about if it's going to be MIS than if you're going to use any robot. It's amazing. The MIS thing, they use the wrong and the weird names. I said, you're going to use laser. I said, you mean small incision. You're going to use endoscope. You're going to use laparoscope. You know, they use the wrong term, but what they really want to ask me if I'm going to have, you know, their surgery performed, because I saw my neighbor, he has a little bit incision and, you know, but, you know, of course, you know, most of them, they're lay person. Sometimes they have a microdiscectomy and they think they had a fusion and you know, but I know not a lot of people asking if you're going to use a robot or not. MIS all the time.
So, Bob, you think you have a mind of inventor. You are an inventor. So you think that the direction of the technology, robotic navigation, makes sense?
I do. I think that there's no question it makes sense. There's no question that the value potentially is there, and you see what people can do, and I think it makes there's definitely surgeons it makes substantially better. I think there's something there. I'm not sure it's fully there yet, but I think that in the right hands, it's a good tool, and taking that and turning it into something that works for everyone, I think is the key.
I have another question for you, Bob. Probably you are the best to answer me that question. So I am a surgeon here in Brazil, and because of the difference of the power, economical power, means that in the near future we will have no more patients because only the surgeons, they will have technology will prosper.
You think that the patients will drive towards the centers that have technology, and that's where the good.
That's my question. That's my question to you. So, you think that in the future, somebody that will not be able to do pedicle screws under navigation will not have cases anymore?
I don't know. I don't know if I believe. Bill quoted the study that Juan always quotes about this kind of a tidal wave that once you hit a certain point, you'll not. You're either on the boat or you're off the boat, and I don't necessarily believe it. I think that right now, what's becoming more prevalent is that all our our outcome data is getting tracked. That insurance companies definitely know how many complications you have, how good of a surgeon. They'll tier you according to your cost effectiveness. And I think that's actually happening, no question. They'll tier you based on how your complication rate. And I think that economic drivers make sense and will 100% impact how successful you can be as a surgeon. I'm not sure if robots are the thing that do that. But if you can't do surgery whether that's with or without navigation, with or without a robot, I think that will come out. I think that'll be readily apparent to everyone, and that'll be on the internet. It'll be easy to be found. It's hard to hide.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually look at it a little bit different. I think rather than looking at it like the individual surgeon, the problem is going to be within institutions. So the 35% is not the surgeon, but what's going to happen is that the institution will lose out. And that's what happened with the prostate surgery, is that if they didn't get I'll jump on the bandwagon, get that Vinci, their numbers went down so far that they just sort of fell out of doing those sorts of surgeries. So they didn't attract business. So I would be more worried about sort of institutional. Now, that's a little bit different in the States because it's driven so much by relationships nowadays. I mean, exactly what Rob is talking about is insurance companies have so many physicians on their panels, and it may be that they have different payment methods, but that those panels then become, first tier or second tier or third tier physicians. So at some point, there's going to be preferential referrals. The reality is I thought that would happen long ago. I honestly thought that would happen more with minimally invasive surgery. I thought that insurance companies would say, why in the world should I send someone to do an open TLIF when I can get someone to do a minimally invasive TLIF with the same outcome and the patient goes home twice as fast? But it didn't happen. And I am not convinced that the way that the U.S. market is set up, that it will ever happen to the extent that people talk about, just like you said with Juan. I do think that in other countries, now Germany is a great example. They have a great national healthcare system. They have sort of a public-private option. If you look, a lot of the prostate data and other surgery data comes from centers that they have. So they send someone to a center, and the reality is that those centers then track those surgeons very, very closely for complications and how you're doing. And at some point, that outcome data and the way that we talk about it, because the only thing we have to track in the States really is readmission data, right? I mean, they track infections and readmissions and other things, but nobody tracks outcomes. And I believe that minimally invasive surgery and robotic surgery and navigation are going to improve outcomes. At what cost, I don't know. But the fact is that I don't know, honestly, that it's going to matter. I really don't. And maybe I'm too old and cynical.
Good point. Very good point. I think Carlos have a question for Igor.
Okay.
Hi, Igor. How are you?
Good.
Thank you again. Thank you again to
Very well.
here with us tonight. It's about the use of navigations in skull spine in pedicle screws. Do you told to us it's not allowed to use navigation in skull spine in US?
No. Robotic. You're allowed to use navigation even to the condyle. Navigation you can use, and most of the people in my service use it for C1, C2. I like it if I have available, but like tomorrow I have one, I might use, I might not, especially if the lateral master C1 is too displaced to make sure where the vertebral artery is. No, the robot is not allowed FDA approved to put pedicle screws or to guide you to put pedicle screws or K-wire above T1.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, navigation, yeah.
I think Charbel has a question. Yeah?
Igor, the question of Charbel is a orthopedic spine surgery in Espírito Santo.
See?
He was here, but he have a bad connection for a live question, so he sent a question for chat. So he's asking you to summarize the difference and the benefits of the robotics upon navigation in your perspective.
Yeah, so my experience again, for the percutaneous K-wire placement, I think robotic is better. You just send the robot to, usually the workflow, let's say we're going to put, I did a 3-level lateral, we put the screws from L2 to S1. I send L2, L3, L4, L5, S1 on the left, and then we come up on the right. It's really quick. If I do the surgery open, I like the navigation a lot. So to the point, I use more navigation nowadays for the upper cervical, and because 95% of my cases are closed in the lower back, I pretty much use a robotic. But that's my experience. I like both, and nowadays you can merge with the new robot. You can merge both. When you drill it, you can see it, but you don't need it if you do percutaneously.
I heard a few things about navigated decompressions, especially with endoscopes. Did any of you guys have any experience with the?
I don't, Rodrigo. Professor,
ask that again. What was that? I didn't hear.
If any of you guys have any experience with navigated or robotic or navigated decompressions. I heard a few things.
You said endoscopically, right, Rodrigo? You said endoscopically.
Maybe, and using the tubular with navigation just to control the tip of the instruments for over-the-top decompression. I think.
I haven't done that. I can tell you and I haven't seen it recently, but I was in Germany a while ago, and the Joymax navigation system is the electromagnetic navigation. And I might be wrong on the exact terminology. Rob might know, but essentially you basically build a box in space of an electromagnetic field. You don't need the array, and you don't need the sort of the same level of rigidity of the instruments, and they know where the instrument is in space based on the interruption of that electromagnetic field. And that's important for the navigation because a lot of that was targeting and other things. And that's where Joymax was going with their endoscopic and their endoscopic decompressions. I don't know that ever turned out to be anything. And in fact, I tried to do endoscopic decompressions and I gave up on it after a while because it was just too hard. I know. Louise always makes fun of me because I tried, but I couldn't do it. Need someone better than me.
And any comments, Bob?
I play with the Joymax version, and it's it works. The original guys who know what Bendini is, the original Bendini was electromagnetic, and so it can work very well. It is very problematic, as Bill alluded to. because any metal in the field will distort the magnetic field and will make the navigation less accurate. Played with navigation a little bit with endoscopes, thoracoscopically, and not so much in the lumbar spine. I understand where there's value. I just hasn't changed my practice.
Any other question?
Yes, there is a question in the Q&A. Is there any possibility in the future for robotic surgery, for example, for any if robotic in the future to become available for anyone, any surgeon? Is it possible for if the surgeon needs to turn to an open surgery, and that surgeon has some difficulty to perform that?
I think the question is a more philosophical question based on if the surgeon was trained with navigated and robotics, and for some reason he have to convert to an open surgery. If the training on some augmented instrumentation system make any difference to the ability of the surgeon to be able to open and to do as in a conventional way. So it's like a question based, like if a driver use it to drive automatic car, if any problem, any need of driving a mechanical car, how you deal with this lack of training if you are training people to use navigation and robotics all the time?
Yeah, I mean, Luis sort of asked that question earlier when he talked about the residents. It drives me crazy. I'm doing an open case. I'm using navigation, and basically I'm using navigation really because I want to do a CT scan at the end more than anything else to find out everything's in the right spot. I mean, that's really why I'm doing it. And then the resident who's doing the case is doing something, and they're looking up at the screen rather than at the patient with what they're doing. And the biggest problem I see is that we get tricked into thinking what's happening on the screen is real. And it's not. It's a picture. It's not real. And that's the problem that they run into, is that they think that is all of a sudden real. If you look back and you see, I actually think that CT navigation and robotics and everything is actually a really good training tool, because you have to plan beforehand. You have to know what you're doing. You have to be able to look at the anatomy and say, here's where I'm going to put the screws and here's what I'm going to do. So I worry less about that, because used properly, I actually think it's a really, really good training tool. The former is my bigger problem, is we have to remember that what's happening on the screen is not real. Yeah, go ahead.
I couldn't agree more. I have this long discussion. It was almost an hour with this. I won't mention his name, but he was telling me that he stopped using CR. And I said, really? How about the odontoid screw? It's like, I use navigation for everything. I said, but it's not really what you've seen. I don't remember how many times I drill and the drill is pushing the fragment up and you're not in the fragment. No, that doesn't happen. And they said, it's exactly what you said. I mean, that's not a real picture. What you see when you try to put the odontoid screw on a navigation is like not the reality. And then you get a CT post-op, that screw is not in the place you want to be. So I couldn't agree more what you said, yeah.
I have a iconic passage through my surgical life that I like to talk to people is, I was, jumping to a surgery to help a friend to do scoliosis cases. And the guy was used to use the BrainLab navigation for degenerative cases and putting pedicle screws by, the navigation system. And the calibration with that system for scoliosis is very hard because a lot of change in the positioning and dissecting.
Yeah.
So I jump into the case and he already have like two pedicle screws in position. And then I take a close look to the anatomy and I said, looks to me that this pedicle screw is not in the right position. And he answered me, no, take a look at the monitor. And the monitor was just showing that it was just perfect. And then, okay, just, bring the C-arm. So we took a C-arm shot and the pedicle screw was completely out of the pedicle, lateral. Not a big issue, not a big damage to the patient itself, but was completely non-calibrated and out of the position. So I just decided to quit the BrainLab and do my freehand technique for the rest of the case, and everything goes well. But that's something that people really need to understand, that, navigation is a tool for people who knows what to do.
It's training. So your training in freehand is probably 10 times better than his training freehand. I have this discussion with a general surgeon friend of mine. They're going through the same thing. He said, I have a chief resident here. He's going to graduate next month. He can take a gallbladder in 20 minutes laparoscopically. But because he was not exposed to trauma and not exposed to open big incisions, he can't convert that if something goes wrong and be that efficient. I think it's going to be the same thing. So it's fascinating. Like for another surgeon, another perspective said, I have a chief resident. He can take a gallbladder laparoscopic in 20 minutes. That was training. He probably done 500, 600. But he had to open a belly to take a gallbladder his whole life. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a big challenge because, the evolution just go one way and we never get ready to come back and relearn everything that our ancients learned in the past. So I think it's just an evolution process and people are going to be able to accommodate and adaptate themselves to this new reality in the near future.
How do you get to be really good at backing up a car when you have a backup camera and you don't need to be good at backing up a car without a backup camera? And you're saying people aren't any good at it anymore. And the reality is they aren't getting good at it anymore. And Bill's right. Is like, if you have it'd be a great learning tool if it was a learning tool and it's not used really as a learning tool. It's used as a crutch, and it's very hard. Igor gets to the point where he knows when it's off, but how do you teach that to someone and then say, okay, now you got to figure it out without it, right?
Yeah, big challenge.
Yes.
Yeah, probably going to have the answers in the near future when the systems itself are more reliable, and we don't need to have this type of discussion because we can really trust in the image that we get. But, for now, it's very important to know traditional open surgery and know the landmarks and know the basis and go from that. Yeah, I think we have no questions and we about, crossing 2 hours of meeting. So if anybody have any other questions, this is the final opportunity. E se alguém tiver alguma última questão, essa é a última oportunidade. A gente passou agora de 2 horas de curso. I think there's no more questions. I really want to thank you guys for all, the brilliant presentations and the enlightened evening that we shared together.
Thanks.
Yeah, we are collecting funds to collaborate with a nonprofit organization in Brazil for COVID fight. So it's an honor cause, and I really want to thank you guys for sharing your time and enjoying this wonderful night. and share this you know, all the knowledge that you guys and all the perspectives you guys have in this probably the game-changing type of procedure that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Igor. Nice to meet you, Igor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you for the time. It was precious. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.